May 15, 1943. Near Matour, Tunisia. The air still smells of cordite and burnt oil as the last shots echo away in the hills. Dust hangs over the ruined olive grove like a low fog. Obergefreiter Karl Weber presses his back against the blackened trunk of a tree, his Mauser rifle slick in his hands. Somewhere ahead, an American Sherman clanks forward its turret, slowly sweeping the grind of its tracks louder than his heartbeat. A whistle blasts, then another. Aufhören, cease fire, Hände hoch, the order rips down the line. Voices repeat it, some panicked, some relieved. A white scrap of cloth appears at the edge of the grove, waving weakly. Karl's company commander stands up. First, helmet askew, hands raised high. For a heartbeat, Karl considers dropping into the ditch and running for the wadi, but there's nowhere left to go. The Afrika Korps is finished. Everyone knows it. He steps out stiff-legged into the sunlight. You can almost hear the scene in your head. Boots crunching in the dry soil, equipment clattering as rifles are laid carefully on the ground. The distant rumble of American armor drawing closer. Dozens of German soldiers emerge from shell holes and foxholes, their gray uniforms coated in weeks of dust, the black Afrika cuff title faint under grime. An American infantry platoon advances cautiously, Garans at the ready, bayonets fixed. Their uniforms look almost shockingly clean to Karl khaki shirts, canvas leggings, shiny helmets with nets. One GI, maybe 20 years old, eyes him and smirks. "Welcome to Uncle Sam's farm, buddy," the American mutters in accented German he picked up somewhere. Karl doesn't understand the joke yet. Not today. They are searched quickly, roughly, but not brutally. Pistols, knives, letters from home, all collected in canvas bags. A military policeman with a white helmet band and an M191 weapon holstered at his hip tags Karl with a cardboard card, scribbling his name and unit number. Prisoner of war, the MP says more to the clerk than to Karl. For the first time since joining the army, Karl feels something strange relief. The fighting is over for him, at least. Hours later, a long column of prisoners snakes along a dusty road towards a collection point. American trucks roar past, loaded with ammunition and fuel heading in the opposite direction. Overhead, the sky is filled with their aircraft, P-38s, glinting silver in the sun. Karl watches them, thinking of his younger brother under British bombs back in Hamburg, and wonders if these same planes will soon be over his family. At the collection camp, an officer from the U.S. Military Police Corps stands on a wooden crate reading through an interpreter. "You are prisoners of war of the United States Army," the interpreter calls out in German. "You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will have food, medical care, and shelter. You will not be harmed if you obey the rules." Murmurs run through the crowd. Geneva Convention, someone scoffs behind Karl. Big words. We'll see. But the promises mostly hold. The camp is crowded but organized, long rows of tents, barbed wire fences, watchtowers with machine guns, a field kitchen that smells of coffee and something like stew. The first meal, watery but hot, arrives in metal buckets. Karl and his comrades clutch tin mess kits, astonished at the white bread and the canned fruit and the thick slices of meat. It isn't luxury, but for men who have been eating sandy rations and horse meat, it might as well be a restaurant. A few weeks later, they are marched to the docks at Bizerte. That's where Karl sees it, a gray American transport ship towering above the quay cranes, swinging cargo nets over her deck. Hundreds of Germans stand in line waiting to board. Some think they're going to another camp in Algeria. Others whisper darker rumors, forced labor and dangerous mines being sent to the Arctic, or worse. A sergeant with a Midwest drawl barks them forward. "Let's go Kraut stateside," Express Staaten. Karl hears the word and glances at his friend Franz. The States, Franz says quietly. America. The idea feels unreal. The enemy's homeland. The land of jazz chewing gum and endless cars, things they'd heard about in newsreels and propaganda, always twisted, always distant. Now they're sailing right into it. The crossing takes weeks. The Atlantic is gray and heaving, the ship packed with men. They sleep in 3-tier bunks, strung like hammocks, the air thick with sweat and seasickness. Guards patrol the passageways with carbines slung, but the atmosphere is wary rather than cruel. Occasionally, the hatch opens, and a gust of cold, clean air washes through. On deck, beneath the watchful eyes of sentries, the prisoners are allowed to stand in groups, look at the horizon, and wonder what waits beyond it. One evening, as the sun sinks into the ocean, Carl overhears 2 American sailors chatting nearby. "Camp in Texas," one says. "Got more Germans than tumbleweeds. Yeah, they're picking cotton, cutting timber, working farms. Pays better than my old job before the war," the other jokes. Carl frowns. Work, farms, paid, it makes no sense. Prisoners don't get wages. Prisoners break rocks, dig ditches, starve. When the ship finally nears the American coast, the mood on board shifts. Men crowd the rails. In the distance, a hazy line appears and then grows into a shoreline, dotted with building smokestacks and cranes. Tugboats chug out to meet them. A band on the pier starts playing a brassy, cheerful tune that feels wildly out of place for arriving enemies. As they disembark under the watchful gaze of MPs, Carl notices something else. The harbor is bursting with ships, Liberty ships, tankers, troop transports lined up in rows, being loaded and unloaded with almost mechanical precision. There are so many that he loses count. "Mein Gott, Franz," whispers beside him. How can they build so many? Carl doesn't answer. He doesn't know. They are loaded into trains, long strings of boxcars, marked U.S. Army in stenciled letters. Each car has narrow slits for windows, but as the train rattles inland, Carl glimpses a world he has never imagined: neat farmhouses with white fences, shining silos, fields stretching to the horizon, highways crowded with trucks and automobiles. No bomb craters, no ruins. Children waving at the passing train, unaware that inside are thousands of their country's enemies. Night falls. Somewhere in the darkness, the train clatters over a river bridge. A guard slides the door open for a moment, and cool air rushes in. "Welcome to America, boys," the MP says, silhouetted in the doorway. "You're going to be here a while. Maybe do some honest farm work." The door slams shut again. Carl leans his head back against the wooden wall and stares into the dark. America. Farms. Work. Wages. He has no idea that within months he'll be standing in a sunlit Iowa cornfield, a pay chit in his pocket, trying to understand how the enemy can afford to feed and pay him better than his own army ever did. Type continued to generate the next section. The train slows with a long metallic groan, brakes squealing as dawn light seeps through the cracks in the boxcar. After days of rumbling through the American interior, the motion finally stops. For a moment, there is only silence. Then the sharp bark of commands, outside the thump of boots on wooden ties, a dog barking somewhere down the line. The door slides open with a bang. Blinding sunlight floods in along with the smell of cut grass and damp earth. Carl squints as the silhouette of an MP appears in the doorway. Carbine slung over his shoulder helmet tilted back. "All right, out you go. Line up on the platform. Let's move." They climb down one after another onto a small wooden platform beside a cluster of low buildings. This isn't a city. No towering skyscrapers, no ship cranes. Instead, Carl sees grain silos, a water tower with the town's name painted on it in fading letters, and beyond that fields. Endless fields. Corn, he thinks. Wheat. The horizon is nothing but crops and sky. A white sign by the tracks reads, "Camp Concordia Branch, U.S. POWs." Beneath it, a line of barbed wire fencing stretches around a cluster of barracks and watchtowers. The camp looks rough, but solid, fresh lumber straight lines guard towers with searchlights and mounted machine guns. Not a punishment camp, Carl thinks, but not a place anyone walks out of either. As they file through the gate, American officers stand behind a table checking names against lists. Red armbands mark the medical staff, who pull aside any prisoners who look sick or wounded. A chaplain in a cross-marked helmet moves along the line, offering a few quiet words in halting German to those who seem particularly shaken. Inside the compound, an officer with silver bars on his shoulders climbs onto a raised platform and waits for the noise to die down. An interpreter stands beside him, another German clearly wearing a POW armband, but standing a little straighter than the rest. "You will listen carefully," the American says. "These are your rules." The interpreter translates, pausing after each sentence. "You are prisoners of war of the United States. You will be housed, clothed, and fed according to the Geneva Convention. You will not be forced to work in war industries. You may volunteer for labor in agriculture, forestry, and other permitted fields. You will receive payment for your work." The word hangs in the air. Bezahlung. Payment. Its echo ripples through the crowd. Men glance at one another, frowning. Carl's friend Franz lets out a skeptical snort. "Sure," he mutters under his breath, "will be paid in fists and kicks." But the officer continues, expression flat. "You will be paid in canteen coupons redeemable for extra food, cigarettes, toiletries, and other items. Any mistreatment by guards is to be reported. You are required to follow camp regulations." In the barracks, the reality begins to sink in. The wooden huts are simple double rows of bunks, pot-belly stoves, bare plank floors, but they are dry, clean, and not overcrowded. Each man receives a thin mattress, 2 blankets, and a metal footlocker. A medic moves down the row with a clipboard taking notes on wounds and illnesses. At the end, Red Cross leaflets appear explaining their rights under Geneva in stilted German. Then comes the first meal. You can almost see the steam rising from the metal trays, thick stew with chunks of meat and potatoes, white bread, margarine, coffee that tastes burnt but strong. At the serving line, a German POW behind the counter, already assigned to kitchen duty, grins at Carl. "Amerikaner essen wie Generäle," he says. "The Americans eat like generals." Carl hesitates as the GI serving bread slaps an extra slice on his tray. "You boys looked half-starved getting off that train," the American says. "Eat up." Around the tables, the shock turns almost to disbelief. Some men cross themselves before eating. Others laugh nervously, as if expecting someone to snatch the food away. Franz chews slowly, brow furrowed. "My wife is standing in line for turnip soup," he says quietly. "And here we are, enemy soldiers, eating like this." A few days later, the work lists go up on the bulletin board. Names, numbers, destinations: farm detail, sugar beets, corn harvest, sawmill, canning factory. Volunteers are requested and heavily encouraged. Carl's name appears next to farm detail, County Sebem. He and Franz are assigned to a group of 20 men. Before dawn, they assemble outside the main gate. A row of civilian trucks and school buses painted olive drab waits beyond the wire, each with an armed MP sitting near the door. The drivers, older men in overalls and baseball caps, lean against the fenders, chatting and smoking. An officer explains through the interpreter, "You will work on local farms today. You will be transported under guard. You will obey the farmer's instructions. At the end of the day, you will return to camp. Your labor will be recorded, and you will receive coupons in the canteen." The idea still feels unreal as Carl climbs into the back of a dusty farm truck. The wood slats creak under the weight of the POWs. The driver, a broad-shouldered American with sunburned arms, glances back at them in the rearview mirror and raises one hand in a casual half-salute. "Morning, fellas," he says. "Name's Bill. Don't worry, we ain't gonna shoot you. Got too much corn to pick." The truck rattles down gravel roads past fields already warming under the rising sun. Carl stares through the gaps in the slats. He sees red barns with white trim windmills turning lazily fat dairy cows grazing behind fences. There are no bomb craters, no burned-out wagons, no refugees walking with bundles on their backs. A farmhouse porch flies a small American flag. On the steps, two blonde children sit, eating something from bowls, while a dog sprawls at their feet. Franz leans close, lowering his voice. "Look at this," he says. "Not a single roof blown off. Not one." They arrive at a medium-sized farm, a big red barn, a white clapboard house, silos towering like concrete towers over the fields. The farmer, a man in his 40s with a weathered face and a straw hat, approaches. He nods once at the MPs, then looks the Germans over without visible hostility, just calculating how many hands he has for the day. "You boys speak any English," he calls. One or two step forward haltingly. The little one says, "Schule and movies." The farmer grunts, then points. "All right. Corn there. We're picking by hand on that slope. You follow me, you work hard, we get along fine. No trouble? No trouble." Out in the field, the rhythm of work takes over. The sun climbs higher, beating down on their caps and bare necks. Leaves scratch their arms as they pull ears of corn and toss them into burlap sacks. The soil smells rich, the stalks rustle like dry whispers. After years of marching and fighting, the simple act of bending, picking, standing, and moving in a steady line feels almost peaceful. During the midday break, the farmer's wife and teenage daughter come out with large metal jugs and baskets. They set up a makeshift table at the edge of the field, sandwiches piled on plates, jars of pickles, big glass pitchers filled with pale yellow lemonade, sweating in the heat. The MPs stand nearby, rifles slung, but muzzles pointed politely at the ground. Carl picks up a sandwich and stares at it. Thick slices of ham, cheese, fresh tomato, crisp lettuce between generous pieces of bread. He thinks of his mother queuing for ration cards back home, of the last time he saw real ham on a plate. He can't remember. The farmer's daughter glances at him, then at his POW armband. She can't be more than 16. Her eyes linger on his dusty uniform, the faded eagle on his chest, the small Africa band at his sleeve. "You're from Africa?" she asks in English. He blinks, then manages, "We fought in Africa." She nods slowly, then pours him a tin cup of lemonade. "Well, she says you're in Kansas now." He takes a sip. The drink is cold, sweet, and tart all at once. For a moment, the war feels impossibly far away. At the end of the day, back at camp, they line up outside a small wooden office. A sergeant behind a desk calls out names and hands each man a small slip and a few stamped coupons. Labor detail one day. Credit 80 cents, the interpreter explains. Redeemable in canteen. Carl turns the coupons over in his hand. They're just bits of paper-printed chits with official stamps, but to him, they feel heavier than they are. Payment. For a prisoner of war. For working on a farm that looks to his eyes richer than any estate he's ever seen in Germany. That night in the dim barracks, he lies awake staring at the rafters. Outside, a train whistle blows somewhere in the distance. The enemy is feeding him well, paying him to work, and surrounding him with a countryside untouched by war. For the first time, a troubling thought pushes to the front of his mind. If this is how American farmers live, what must their generals have at their disposal? And what chance did Germany ever really have? Type continue to generate the next section. July 3rd, 1944. The Kansas sun hangs high and heavy over the camp, bleaching the world in white light. Heat shimmers above the gravel streets between the barracks, turning the air into ripples. Inside the wire, life has fallen into a strange, steady rhythm. Work parties, roll calls, mail days, and most important of all, paydays. Carl stands in line outside the administration hut, sweat trickling down his back under his faded field blouse. The queue shuffles forward inch by inch, boots scuffing the dust. At the front, through the open doorway, he can see the pay table, a sergeant with a ledger, an interpreter with a stack of paper slips, and a wooden tray filled with small booklets and coupons. Name Weber Karl, Nummer 379. The sergeant runs a finger down the list, checks off a line, and nods. 3 weeks labor detail farm and sawmill. $2.40, the interpreter says in German, then translates the rest as the sergeant speaks. Credited in canteen coupons and passbook. A small booklet is pushed across the table, followed by a fan of stiff coupons. Carl picks them up carefully, as if they might vanish. On the cover of the booklet in English are the words, "Prisoner of War Fay Record," with his number stamped below. Stepping out of the line into the sunlight, he opens it. Neat columns record his days on the farm, his hours at the sawmill loading lumber, his brief stint repairing fences. Beside each entry is a small figure, 20 cents, 40 cents, 80 cents, marching down the page, adding up to a total he has never seen attached to his name before. Franz emerges behind him, grinning despite the heat. He waves his own booklet like a ticket. "Can you believe this?" he says. "Paid. We are paid. To pick corn for the enemy." Carl doesn't answer right away. Believe is a strong word. Yet here it is in his hands, proof in ink and paper, that the work they do is counted, valued, and exchanged for something tangible. That afternoon, the canteen opens. If you'd been standing in that camp, you would have seen the prisoners gather like it was a festival day. They crowd under the eaves of a long wooden hut near the center of the compound, beneath a sign that reads, "Camp Canteen," in neat block letters. An MP stands at the door, arms folded, while inside shelves and counters gleam under electric lights. Only a dozen men are allowed in at a time. When Carl's turn comes, he steps through the doorway and stops dead. He has seen shops before, of course, small grocers back home in Hamburg with empty bins and long queues, bakery windows holding a few precious loaves. This is something else entirely. The canteen is not large, but every inch of wall space seems full rows of canned fruit and meat piles of chocolate bars, boxes of crackers, stacks of cigarettes in bright cardboard packs, Lucky Strike, Camel, Chesterfield shaving cream toothbrushes, writing paper, playing cards, even cheap combs and tin mirrors. The smell hits him tobacco, sugar, soap, coffee grounds. The scent of a country that has not known shortage or bombing. A German POW behind the counter appointed as clerk nods at him. "First time?" the man asks. Carl nods mutely. The clerk gestures with his chin at the shelves. "Prices on the board. You pay with coupons. No cash. Americans watch stocks, but they let us run it." On a chalkboard, someone has written the offerings in careful, slightly crooked handwriting. Chocolate bar, 10C, cigarettes PK, 12C, coffee cup, 5C, ice cream cup, 8C, candy mix, 5C, soap, 6C, stationery set, 7C. Carl's eyes snag on one word. Ice. "Cream," he says slowly in English, tasting the unfamiliar term. The clerk smiles faintly. "Ja, Eis. They have a freezer, delivered from town." Behind him, an American civilian with a white apron scoops something pale and soft from a metal tub into paper cups. A small line of POWs waits, coupons in hand. The civilian, clearly used to this ritual, works with practiced rhythm, scoop, slide, pass. Franz appears at Carl's shoulder. His voice drops to a stunned whisper. Ice cream. For prisoners. My son has never even tasted it. They move along the counter like men in a dream. Carl trades coupons for a bar of chocolate, real chocolate, dark and smooth, under the paper wrapper, and a packet of cigarettes. At the end of the line, almost without thinking, he holds out an extra coupon for the ice cream cup. The first spoonful is almost painful. The cold shocks his teeth, but then the flavor hits sweet, creamy rich in a way that feels decadent, almost indecent for someone in a POW uniform. Around him, other German soldiers are experiencing the same thing, closing their eyes, exhaling softly, some laughing outright at the absurdity of it. A young corporal from the Eastern Front shakes his head. In Russia, he says they shot prisoners in pits. Here, ice cream. No one quite knows how to respond. Back in the barracks that evening, they sit around the potbelly stove. Even in summer, it becomes the natural gathering place and inventory their purchases. Cigarette packs are opened and shared. A bar of soap is passed down the line for inspection. Someone has bought a deck of playing cards with red and blue American designs on the back. Franz unfolds a sheet of the new stationery. "Write to my wife," he says. "Tell her that your husband captured by the Americans was paid today, that he bought chocolate and cigarettes. She will think I've gone mad." Under the dim bulb hanging from the rafters, pens scratch across paper. You can almost hear the words forming. "My dear Lotta, today we went to the camp shop. They call it a canteen. We can buy things with coupons we earn from work." Carl pauses, chewing the end of his pencil. How do you describe to someone under air raid sirens that enemy soldiers are eating better than civilians at home? He settles on the truth, even if it sounds like fantasy. The Americans pay us for our labor. With these wages, we can buy chocolate, tobacco, even ice cream. Yes, ice cream. I did not believe it until I tasted it. The shelves are full. No one stands in line for hours. There are no bomb craters. It is as if the war does not touch this land. He stops staring at the words. A knot forms in his chest, guilt, relief, and something like anger all mixed together. Days turn into weeks. Work parties go out every morning to farms, sawmills, canneries, even to unload sacks of grain at small-town rail sidings. At one grain elevator, under the watchful eyes of MPs, Carl watches American freight cars rumble past, loaded with wheat, corn, and soybeans. The foreman mentions almost casually that most of it is headed to the East Coast to be shipped overseas to Britain, to Italy, to France. So much food, Franz murmurs. Enough for their people, for their soldiers, and for us. On another day, the farm truck they're riding in breaks down near town. While the farmer and the MP argue about a spare part, and the POWs sit in the back peering through the slats at Main Street. They see store windows filled with radios, shoes, dresses, shelves of canned goods stacked in pyramids. A small diner on the corner has a sign in the window. Today's special, steak and eggs 65C. Or, men in work shirts sit on stools at a counter eating calmly, sipping coffee, dropping coins into a jukebox that croons big band music into the warm air. One of the German NCOs, a former shopkeeper from Bremen, lets out a low whistle. In our newspapers, he says they showed pictures of Americans standing in bread lines during the Depression. Our propaganda said their system had failed. But look at this. Carl watches a young couple step out of a grocery store with paper bags full of food. They laugh at something the woman says, their car keys jingling as they walk to a shiny sedan parked at the curb. No one seems afraid of bombs. No one is rationing potatoes by the spoonful. Back in the truck, as the engine finally coughs back to life, Franz leans his head against the sideboard. "I thought being captured would be the end," he says quietly, so only Carl can hear. But it feels like we were marched straight into another world. And in this world, We are poor men even with our pay. And with that night in the barracks, someone reads aloud from a newspaper, an English-language American paper traded for cigarettes and translated piece by piece. It lists ship launchings, aircraft production numbers, crop yields. The figures sound impossible. Liberty ships every few days, thousands of planes a month. And beneath it all, an agricultural machine so vast it can feed its own people armies on 3 continents and still have enough left over to give prisoners ice cream. The men listen in silence. You can feel the realization slowly settling over them like dust on a still evening. The understanding that their world, the world they left behind in bomb-blasted Europe, is smaller, poorer, and far more fragile than they were taught to believe. Carl closes his eyes and sees again the canteen shelves the diner sign, the effortless abundance. He remembers his pay booklet, the neat American handwriting recording his labor. He thinks of his father, once proud of Germany's industry, and wonders what the old man would say if he could see this camp, this country, this casual wealth spent even on its enemies. For the first time, the thought fully forms, sharp and unwelcome. Perhaps we never had a chance at all. Perhaps the war was lost long before we even crossed into Poland or France. And we just did not know it. Type continue to generate the next section. October 10th, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The first chill of autumn has crept into the mornings. The fields around the camp have turned from deep green to pale gold, and the farm trucks now trundle past with wagons piled high, corn, wheat, hay bales stacked in neat, abundant mountains. Inside the wire, Carl stands in another line, but this one is the most important of all the mail line. An MP with a mail bag slung over his shoulder walks slowly along the row of prisoners, reading names from envelopes in a flat Midwestern accent. Beside him, a German interpreter repeats the surnames with sharper consonants. Every time a letter is handed over, the men closest lean forward like plants, turning toward the sun. Weber Karl. The sound hits him like a physical jolt. He raises his hand. Hero. The envelope is thin, its edges worn from travel across an ocean and a continent. The return address is unmistakable, Hamburg. The handwriting belongs to his wife Anna. A black censor stamp mars the corner, and faint blocks of ink where certain lines have been blacked out show where someone has decided a phrase was too sensitive to pass. Carl steps away from the line-heart hammering and finds a quiet spot at the side of the barracks. He sits on the low step, fingers clumsy as he opens the envelope. My dearest Carl. Your letter reached us after many weeks. The boys ask about you every day. They were so proud to hear that you are alive, even if in captivity. The words blur for a moment, and he has to blink hard to bring them back into focus. She writes of air raids, of sirens that scream in the night, of grabbing the children and stumbling down into cold concrete shelters while the sky above erupts in light and fire. Of the smell of burned timber and broken stone, of queuing for hours for meager rations, a few potatoes, a bit of black bread, sometimes watery soup if they are lucky. The chocolate you mentioned, the ice cream. Here the line is half blackened by the censor, but enough remains to understand. The children have never tasted such things. When I showed them your words, they did not believe me at first. How can it be that you in a camp can buy such things while here at home we count every potato? He stops reading and stares at the gravel between his boots. Around him, other men hold their own letters, their faces tight, some smiling through tears, some expressionless in that empty way. That means the news inside is bad. One man from Cologne folds his letter carefully and walks off without a word, shoulders hunched as if carrying a new, invisible weight. Franz appears and sits down beside Carl, an opened envelope in his hand. His face is pale. From my sister, he says quietly. Our street. He gestures with the paper, unable to finish. Gone. 2 houses standing. The rest, rubble. He looks up suddenly, eyes burning. And here, he says, voice sharpening, the farmer apologized this morning because he could only give us 1 slice of cake each. War shortages, he said. War shortages. The words hang between them, bitter and absurd. Carl imagines Anna standing in a ruin, brushing plaster dust from the boy's hair, while he complains inwardly if the camp stew has too few potatoes. That evening in the barracks, the letters are read and reread, until the paper softens at the folds. Then, as the stove crackles softly, the talk begins. Hamburg, flattened. Dresden, have you heard the rumors? They say it was like the end of the world. In Essen, my brother says they work 12 hours a day in the factory, and still there is not enough. The raids never stop. Across the room, a corporal with sharp eyes and an Iron Cross ribbon at his tunic shares a different sort of message. He stands near his bunk, a few loyal listeners gathered close. Remember what the party taught us, he says. These displays of wealth, all this sugar and meat, it's propaganda. They are trying to soften you, to make you forget your duty. Germany fights for its life. We must stay loyal. His voice carries just enough to reach beyond his circle. A few nod. Others look away uneasily. Later, as the lamp flickers, the same corporal corners Carl by the wash basins. You wrote in your last letter that you admired American efficiency, he says, lips curling. That's circulated. The censors share such foolishness. Carl stiffens. Admire is not the same as love. He replies carefully. I can see with my own eyes. Their trains run on time. Their shelves are full. Their farms burst with food. That is fact. The corporal steps closer, voice dropping to a hiss. Facts, he says. The fact is, you are still a German soldier. Or have a few cups of ice cream made you forget which uniform you wear? For a heartbeat, the tension is thick enough to cut. Nearby, a guard's boots crunch past outside the wall. The corporal holds Carl's gaze a moment longer, then snorts and walks away muttering about soft men and lost spirit. Inside camps across America, scenes like this play out again and again, hardline believers clinging to the old myths, others quietly conceding what their eyes and stomachs tell them. The war is being fought not just in the skies over Europe, but in the minds of these men behind American wire. Weeks pass. The harvest shifts from corn to sugar beets, from hay to livestock chores. On one farm, Carl and Franz help load hogs for market, the animals squealing as they are prodded up the ramp. The farmer jokes with the truck driver about prices and the upcoming winter, then turns and in slow, careful German says to Carl, after war, maybe you come back. Work here. Good farmhand, good pay. Carl laughs awkwardly, unsure if it's a serious offer or a kind-hearted fantasy. But the thought lodges in his mind. A future. Here. In this land of endless fields and full shelves. That night, he writes back to Anna. Kasker Thor, you will not believe what I'm about to say. Sometimes I think if not for you and the children, I could stay here forever. The farmers live well. They worry about the weather and the price of crops, not about bombs or hunger. They pay us, Anna. They give us more food than we can eat, even when the newspapers say there is rationing here too. If this is how the ordinary people live, I cannot imagine the strength behind their armies. His pencil hovers for a moment before he adds, when we marched into Poland, into France, they told us Germany was strong, that we were destined to lead Europe. Here on these farms, watching trains of grain and cattle and machines roll past every day, I begin to think we were children told stories about giants, only to discover the giants were somewhere else. When he finishes the letter, he folds it carefully, feeling the mix of guilt and grim honesty in every line. The camp censor will read it first, Perhaps some parts will be blacked out. But enough will get through. As he slips the envelope into the outgoing mail bag, the loudspeaker crackles to life outside, announcing the latest news bulletin for the camp. An interpreter reads from an American communique: Allied forces have crossed into Germany. Aachen has fallen. The Red Army advances in the east. Men gather in small clusters to listen, faces tight, eyes narrowed. Each new place name is another piece of home sliding out of their side's control. Behind the words, behind the map lines, lies the unspoken reality Carl has already glimpsed in the canteen and on the farms. The outcome is becoming clear. And the wages in his pocket, the ice cream on his tongue, the letters from a shattered Hamburg, all of it is forcing him to confront a truth that is bigger than any one battle. May 8th, 1945. Camp Concordia. The sky over Kansas is a clear, endless blue when the loudspeaker crackles to life just after morning roll call. The POWs stand in formation rows of gray uniforms facing the flagpole where the stars and stripes flap lazily in the mild wind. The usual announcements work. Details, mail schedule are read first. Then the voice of the American camp commander comes on slower and more formal than usual. Men. This is an official communique from the War Department. The German High Command has signed an unconditional surrender. Hostilities in Europe have ceased. For a moment, nothing happens. The words hang in the air, incomprehensible syllables that refuse to fit into the world as these men know it. The interpreter repeats it in German, his own voice catching slightly. Das Oberkommando der Wehrmacht hat die bedingungslose Kapitulation unterzeichnet. Die Kämpfe in Europa sind beendet. Silence. Then a half-stifled exclamation from somewhere in the ranks. Someone else laughs, a short hysterical bark that doesn't sound like joy. Another man mutters a prayer under his breath. A guard shifts his weight, glancing uneasily at the sea of stunned faces. Carl feels his legs go weak. The war, over. He had imagined the end coming in some great decisive battle. A last stand somewhere deep inside Germany, or a negotiated peace that would at least preserve some shred of what they'd been told they were fighting for. Unconditional surrender is something else. It is final. It means everything they knew is gone. The commander's voice continues. For you men, this means you are no longer combatants. You are disarmed enemy personnel and will be held until repatriation can be arranged. There will be no changes to your rations or treatment. Further instructions will follow. Behind the wire, life resumes in its strange groove. But outside, the world moves differently. That afternoon, on a farm detail, Carl sees it firsthand. The truck pulls up to the familiar red barn, but instead of the usual quiet start to the day, they are greeted by noise, a radio blaring music from the farmhouse window, children running around the yard, waving small flags, the farmer's wife hanging a hastily painted sign on the gate that reads, "Victory in Europe." WWii. The farmer himself strides toward the truck, grinning broadly, his straw hat tilted back. He exchanges a few words with the MP, permission boundaries, the usual warnings, then turns to the Germans. "It's over in Europe," he says in slow, careful German. "No more fighting. For you, war finished." The POWs look at him, then at each other. No one quite knows what expression to wear. The farmer jerks a thumb toward the field. "Work today is light," he says. "We do a little, then you rest. My wife, she makes something special." Out among the rows of emerging corn, the air feels different. In Europe, surely bells are ringing in ruined churches. People are pouring into shattered streets, some cheering, some weeping, some too numb to do either. Here in Kansas, the cicadas buzz, the soil crumbles between calloused fingers, and the horizon is still a calm, unbroken line. Around noon, they are called back to the farmhouse. On the porch, a large radio sits in the window, volume turned high. A news announcer's voice flows out, names of cities: Berlin, London, Washington. Churchill speaks, then Truman, their words rolling over the farmyard in grand phrases about victory, freedom, and sacrifice. The farmer's wife steps out, carrying trays, sandwiches, apple pie, coffee, and metal mugs. She hesitates only a second when she sees the POWs, then sets the trays on a table just inside the fence. The MP nods his approval. "For you also," she says in English, gesturing to the food. "Today?" Big day. Carl picks up a slice of pie. The crust is flaky and golden and the filling still warm. He takes a bite and has to close his eyes for a moment. Cinnamon sugar soft apples. It tastes like something from a memory he never had. Beside him, Franz chews slowly, watching the farmer's children chase each other in the yard, laughing, tripping over the family dog. "You hear the man on the radio," Franz says quietly. "He says they can now turn to the business of peace." He snorts, but there's no real bitterness in it. "For us, the business of peace is still working these fields. For our families..." He doesn't finish. Later, as the truck rattles back toward camp, they pass through the small town. The streets are decorated flags, hanging from windows, a hastily assembled banner across Main Street. Outside the diner, someone has chalked on the sidewalk, V-Day. Men in work shirts stand in clusters, shaking hands, slapping each other on the back. Cars honk as they pass, some with teenage boys perched on the running boards, shouting and laughing. The POWs watch through the slats, unseen and yet present ghosts, moving through a celebration that isn't quite theirs. Back in the barracks that evening, the mood is mixed. Some men are quietly jubilant. For them, surrender means no more fear of being sent back to the front, no more wondering which offensive they will be thrown into next. Others are stricken, as if the ground has vanished beneath their feet. The true believers stare at the floor or mutter about betrayals and stab in the back, echoing old phrases from another defeated generation. The camp commandant allows a special news reading over the loudspeaker, summarizing the surrender terms. There is mention of occupation zones of the Wehrmacht, laying down arms of Germany's unconditional defeat. The words land heavily. After lights out, the barracks whispers on in the dark. What will they do with us now? When do we go home? Is there even a home to go back to? Carl lies awake, listening. His pay booklet is tucked under his mattress. His latest letter from Anna folded and refolded until the paper threatens to tear. In his mind, the images collide: the ruined streets she described, and the full shelves he saw in the town grocery store. The apple pie on the farmhouse porch, and the turnip soup she serves the boys by candlelight when the power fails after a raid. War has ended, he thinks, but the meaning of it is only now becoming clear. The enemy has not only defeated them on the battlefield, it has outproduced, outfed, and outspent them on a scale they never imagined. He, a prisoner, has been paid to help harvest a fraction of that abundance. And somewhere in Hamburg, his family reads words on paper that must seem like fairy tales: wages, canteens, ice cream. Type continue to generate the next section. Your previous section text. Continue seamlessly from where this left off. Section 6. Going home to another country. September 1946. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The barbed wire looks different when you know you're about to leave it behind. Morning mist clings to the fence lines as a group of POWs gathers near the main gate, duffel bags at their feet, pay booklets and documents tucked into their jackets. Carl stands among them, one hand resting on the worn wood of the barracks wall. Eyes roaming over the camp that has become, against all expectation, a kind of rough, constrained home. Overhead, the flag flutters, as it always has. The guard towers still stand at the corners, silhouettes against the brightening sky. But the watchful tension is gone. The guards lean on the railings, rifles slung casually. Some even call down a few words of farewell. Take care, boys. Good luck back home. In the weeks leading up to this day, the camp has been thinning out. Men were loaded onto trains bound for East Coast ports, shipped to Europe port, by camp by camp. Some headed to British or French custody for further labor before eventual repatriation. Others, like Carl's group, would go directly back to the ruins of occupied Germany. Before departure, they marched one last time to the canteen. Not to buy this time, but to settle accounts. The clerk, a German sergeant who's been behind that counter longer than anyone, hands Carl his final statement. Coupons that remain are exchanged for small items, a bar of soap, a packet of cigarettes, a cheap metal pen. Nothing of great value, but tangible reminders, nonetheless. You were a regular? The clerk says with a faint smile. Always chocolate when it came in. Carl smiles back. My children, he says, if there is any left of it by the time I see them. At the edge of the compound, a familiar farm truck pulls up dust curling around its tires. To Carl's surprise, the driver is Bill the Canson, who first drove them out to harvest corn years ago. He hops down from the cab, wiping his hands on his overalls. Heard some of you boys were shipping out? Bill says in his slow drawl. Figured I'd come say goodbye. He reaches into the truck and pulls out a small cloth sack. Inside are a few carefully chosen items, a family photograph, a small paperback English-German dictionary, a folded handkerchief embroidered with a clumsy but heartfelt good luck in red thread. My wife and girls put that together, Bill explains. Can't do much, but maybe it helps. Carl takes the photograph first. The farmer's family stands in front of the barn and the dog at their feet, the field stretching behind them, green orderly, untouched. It feels like a picture from another planet. Danke, Carl says simply. For the work, for the food, for treating us like men. Bill shrugs, embarrassed. Just doing what the army pays us for, he says. Then more quietly, my boys are over there. Somewhere in your country. Maybe somebody's treating them decent too. A few hours later, the train pulls out, carrying them east. Through the dirty glass, the American landscape unspools one last time, farms, towns, highways, humming with trucks and cars. Grain elevators, factories, bridges. It goes on, an endless belt of productivity. Carl presses his palm against the window and tries to memorize it, the sense of space, of resources, of a country that fought a world war without tasting it on its own soil. He wonders how he will ever explain this to people back home, whose only sight of America comes from bombs falling from a dark sky. The Atlantic crossing is rougher this time, older ship, worse weather. But the real shock waits on the other side. They disembark at a ruined Port Bremerhaven, or what is left of it. The air smells of salt diesel and soot. Warehouses gape open like broken teeth. The pier is warped, patched in places, the cranes rusted and skeletal. Allied military police process them, briskly issuing temporary documents and directing them toward the distribution camps. On the train into Germany proper, the silence in the car is different from the quiet of Kansas mornings. Here, it's heavy, suffocating. Outside the window, mile after mile of devastation slides past twisted rail yards, villages with half their houses missing city skylines reduced to forests of chimneys and broken walls. Laundry flaps between ruins. Children play among piles of rubble as if they were rocks in a field. When Carl finally reaches Hamburg, he almost doesn't recognize it. The proud port city he left years ago is now a landscape of scars. Entire districts are flattened streets ending abruptly in heaps of brick and tangled rebar. Church spires stand like lonely fingers pointing to a sky that has been on fire too many times. He finds Anna and the children in what remains of their old neighborhood, a single surviving building in a row of foundations and empty lots. The reunion is awkward at first. The boys have grown their faces sharper, older than their years. Anna is thinner, her hands rough, her eyes watchful. That night, after the first overwhelmed embraces and the shared silence of those who have both seen too much, they sit at a small table. On it is a thin stew, a loaf of dense black bread, and a single candle. The electricity works only sporadically. Carl reaches into his bag and pulls out his treasures, a bar of American chocolate carefully saved from his last trip to the canteen, a small tin of coffee, the photograph of the Kansas farm family. The boys stare wide-eyed. "This," he says, pushing the chocolate toward them, "is what your father bought with the wages he earned. Working for American farmers." The word hangs in the air. "Wages," Anna repeats, incredulous. "You were paid." He nods. Slowly, haltingly, he tells them everything: the work on the farms, the canteen, the ice cream, the full shelves in small-town grocery stores, the diners with steak and eggs on the menu even in wartime. The boys listen in stunned silence. Anna frowns, trying to reconcile his story with the propaganda they heard and the reality outside their door. "So, you, a prisoner, ate better than we did," she says softly. There's no accusation in her voice, just a kind of exhausted wonder. "Yes," Carl answers, his throat tight. "I did. And I was paid to work. Not much, but enough to buy these things. Enough to see that their ordinary people lived as well as perhaps better than our officers." For a long moment, no one speaks. Then his older son, almost a teenager, now says quietly, "In school they told us the Americans were starving, that their system was failing." Carl exhales slowly. He thinks of the endless trains of grain, the canteens, the apple pie on VE Day. He shakes his head. "They told us many things," he says. "But out there," he taps the photograph of the farm, "I saw how they really lived. We were never fighting just soldiers, Anna. We were fighting a country that could feed its people like that, and still have enough left over to pay its prisoners and give them ice cream." Years later, when the boys are men and Germany is rebuilding, they will repeat this story more than once. Neighbors will shake their heads in disbelief. Younger listeners will ask if it's an exaggeration. And Carl will always answer the same way, by describing the taste of that first spoonful of ice cream, the weight of his pay booklet in his hand, the sight of overfull American store windows, while his own city lay in ruins. He had gone to war believing in German strength. He came home understanding American abundance, and for the rest of his life, whenever someone asks what it was like to be a prisoner in the United States, he will pause, look down at his calloused hands, and say, "We couldn't believe they paid us to work on their farms. We couldn't believe how well they fed us. And that, more than anything, taught me why we lost."